What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to For the Millie. Very fun slate here tonight. It feels a little bit like an NBA slate where Cooper Cup is playing. Puka has been activated. We don't know if he's playing. We finally got the Hawkinson news that he's not playing. How are you even approaching this slate, TwoGun?
I mean, I did not think Nakua would be playing, so that is definitely would throw a wrench in my stuff if he does. I didn't expect Hawkinson to be matter much, so I guess that's fine. That doesn't really matter things. I've generally been looking. I feel like leaning towards Ram heavy stacks. Pick six heavily on the Rams, betting on the Rams, just because I think the Rams are more hated and are the Vikings really going to keep staying undefeated? I don't know. So that's really where I'm leaning at, and I tend to like the passing on both of these teams. But again, it's going to matter if Nakua is playing or not. I guess we'll see if he's active after the stream's over.
Yeah, it seems like he's going to be active. The question is just how much of a role does he actually have? I think what I saw last was his receiving line is only at like 26.5, which suggests that he's going to be playing a very limited amount of snaps. We also saw last week they did something very similar with Whittington, where it's like we all expected him to be in just his usual role, and 0 targets, barely even played. So it's very possible they do something like that. I don't know what the motivation would be there, but yeah, it certainly adds uncertainty to the slate. And I'm with you. I think it's pretty clear that the sharper route is to go heavier on this Los Angeles side, but it then just becomes a little bit difficult to figure out exactly how we want to do that. But before we talk showdown, I want to jump into just some of this DVOA matchup data, and then actually get into some picks first and just kind of talk through what our favorite picks are, what our favorite strategies are in pick six. Then we'll close this show with some showdown thoughts and potentially some main slate discussion, although I don't think either of us have really been able to dive too much into that just yet. So, TwoGun, the Vikings have been a really nice matchup fantasy-wise, actually, in two ways. Number one, they're so far ahead every single game that like all of their opponents have basically had to speed up the game, throw the ball a lot, and they've been able to produce in pretty predictable ways. It's been all of the wide receiver 1 and the wide receiver 3s, which is basically all other wide receivers. So like last week, heavy on Amon-Ra St. Brown, heavy on Tim Patrick or Khalif Raymond, you probably did well. You certainly won all of your picks, whether you were taking them on sports books, on Pick Six, Prize Picks, any of those places. And tonight, like originally, I thought, okay, this sets up really well. Tutu Atwell's going to be the wide receiver 3. We know, wide receiver 1 was going to be Cooper Kupp. Now with Puka in the mix, I don't really know what to think. I now it's like, I think two is still going to have a good enough role in that wide receiver 3 spot, but Demarcus Robinson also gets pushed to that wide receiver 3 designation. Makes it a lot tougher, but just to get into these numbers a little bit, quarterbacks have produced 14% less against Minnesota than average, running backs 15% less, and yet because they're throwing the ball so much, 44% boost for wide receiver 1s, 74% for all other wide receivers. So pretty crazy just how specific this matchup has been, and it does make me think that at least one of these Rams receivers is going to have a big night.
Yeah, and often it's in these uncertainty, which is where you get the biggest edges, because people just don't want to play it because like, I don't know.
Yeah.
But it's showdown, man. Like it's the most uncertain of certainty of uncertainties. Like you just have to embrace it and just hope for the best, You can't be like, act like you need to know or like feel like you have to know, because it's at the end of the day, like one touchdown breaks the slate or changes everything. So that's often when you don't want to just make choices. Like if this was in the main slate, you could be like, what's the point of messing with Tutu Atwell, right? There's probably someone else. But with it's just one game, you kind of have to embrace it. Is just the way I look at it. And I don't know, like maybe some people know more like Tutu Atwell or Demarcus Robinson is better. Or, a lot of people might in that price range go towards just rostering the tight end, Parkinson or whatever, or they might just decide to go Minnesota heavy. People can go a variety of ways.
Mm-hmm.
But
On underdog now,
have to bite the bullet with it.
Yeah, on underdog now, Parkinson and Tutu Atwell are both at 31.5. Demarcus Robinson down to 22.5. Do you have a favorite among the three? Because I definitely still lean to Tutu Atwell more than 31.5 of those three guys.
Yeah, I mean, you probably know more football than I do, but I think Tutu Atwell's just kind of done better this year, and why do you need Parkinson when you have Cooper Kupp back? Almost.
Mm-hmm. I think you kind of alluded to it there, but the reason why I like Tutu the most of those three is because of his explosiveness, right? Like, I don't think any of these guys are going to be highly involved in the offense. So it's which guy is going to get there with 1, maybe 2 receptions and not need 6 targets on the night to get there. And to me, that's Tutu.
Yeah.
All right. On the Los Angeles side, we've had another kind of pretty predictable story where some of these matchups are really extreme. So the two best are the tight end plus 32% against Los Angeles and the wide receiver 2 plus 31%. Running backs are also up 14%. Wide receiver 3, so all other wide receivers, down 75%. So I think this too is a pretty similar story or not a similar story, but like another clear story where this Los Angeles defense just hasn't been good enough to force quarterbacks to go to the third or even the fourth option. Teams are just able to do what they want. They're able to get the ball to the guys that they want. And so to me, I think this is a pretty rough matchup for Naylor. I love it for Addison. I would have loved it for Hockenson as well. Certainly a good spot as well for Aaron Jones. But I think Jordan Addison is the guy in Minnesota who really stands out as having a great matchup. And like Tutu Atwell, he's another guy who, man, he's just an explosive play waiting to happen. And so whether it's showdown, whether it's, picking on underdog, prize picks, sports books, or in pick 6, I do like the more than, although when we get to pick 6, it's a little bit tougher of a discussion now because Addison has gone from 41.5 to 43.5 and now up to 46.5. So if you play him on pick 6, you better know not only are you getting a worse number now, but you're also playing into what everyone else is playing. So if Addison does hit, it's going to be a pretty popular selection, and you better be using that as leverage off another popular selection if you're going there on pick 6 at this point. Can you hear me, TwoGun? Oh, we lost you.
Excuse me?
We can almost hear you. I think your mic is blocked or something.
Is this better now?
Yes. Yep.
Okay, so it could be his line just went up because Hawkinson's out.
No, this was before that announcement was made.
So it keeps steaming, is what you're telling me.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I just don't know how much I don't know if you really like. It still might only be like 5 to 10% of people making that pick, man. Like I wouldn't like total. There's ways to get unique at it besides just like, okay, I can't take Addison more. Kind of look at the rest of your lineup. Like, you don't want to just take Addison more, Justin Jefferson more, and Darnold more, because other people have better lines than you, and it's gonna be a popular pick. I think it's still fine to take Addison more if you're taking like Justin Jefferson less. That type of weird thing. I wouldn't like sweat it too much if you're doing something like that. If you're doing something contrarian like that with it, and that's often the best way to, with these 1 games. Like, I'm kind of become a believer in the pick 6 more for these 1 games or 2 games because where you do part of your lineup is a very basic bitch, quarterback, wide receivers, but you have something in there on the other side that's a little bit more unique. And I think I think it depends on how you're using Addison.
Yeah, I agree. So, for example, I think one thing you can do, by the way, he's actually fallen back down to 45.5. So maybe once he got to 46.5, started seeing some action on the unders. But I think more on Addison with a less on either Jefferson or Naylor is a good way to play it. I think similarly, there's a lot of opportunity on this Rams side. We talked about how much uncertainty there is. Well, You could go less on Cooper Cup, only 67.5, by the way. So I think that could be pretty popular, with a more on both Tutu Atwell and Puka Nakua. Or you can say more on Cooper Cup, less on Puka Nakua, all the way down to just 29.5 receiving yards for him. So I really like this slate in the sense that there are so many different options. And I know you do this like on any slate, but this strikes me as a good one to get as many 6-pick plays as you possibly can on there and just tell different stories in each one, because our ability to correlate well on this slate is really, really strong.
Yeah. I think it's kind of what, you got to play with our tool set with these correlations, because I think that's what it's all about. And it doesn't necessarily need to be the most like obvious, straightforward correlations. Sometimes it's just.
Yep. Another one I like a lot, and this gets to the idea of just playing for a either more competitive game than people expect, or even for the Rams actually, playing with a lead for a lot of this game. Aaron Jones has gone from, I think it was 67.5 rushing yards all the way up to 72.5. So a less on Aaron Jones with a more on Kyren Williams. That's as straightforward as the correlations get, and certainly I think a very contrarian path tonight.
I mean, that's just kind of very normal correlation that people probably just aren't going to use.
Yeah.
So the quarterback over with a running back under, I think people catching on, but kind of certain running backs are just like these big RB1s that are like leaned on, like they're very game strict dependent when it comes to getting that rushing yards total. So you just kind of go with you can just go with it both ways, to be honest. You go with and then like whichever side you're taking, if you're taking Kyren Williams over, you can do it with Matt Stafford like under attempts. It's something I like to do.
Yeah. In fact, I think like if you want just a basic 4-pick play that makes a lot of sense, I think you could do something like Stafford under on passing attempts, Kyren Williams over on rushing yards, Aaron Jones under on rushing yards, Sam Darnold over on passing attempts. That's it. Like if you get the script you're asking for, that's a really, really high probability play right there. So you can also, of course, then just add 2 more, make it a 6-pick, and go for that 100x, 400x payout that we've seen happen on these island games. But yeah, like I said, so many different ways on this pick 6 slate to correlate well and do so in a contrarian way just makes it a really fun slate to attack.
Yeah. I mean, it's just, you gotta play with different ideas, and in general, try to, don't be married to like just 2 or 3 pick 6s. Like have more with less money on each. That way, if the 50 to 100x hits, you're there. Because that's honestly with pick 6, that's what I'm seeing as the way to win. Like if you can correlate your best, but if everyone correlates too and it all makes sense and you're getting that 12x payout, boom, you break even. No one wins except the rake. The way you win is you put yourself in position to hit that 100x. And yeah, most of your lineups miss, but all you need is 1. And you're golden.
Yeah, I think a really good way to think about that is all of the like 100x payouts that we've seen, the 400x payouts, when you actually go and you look at what those lineups look like, you kind of think, oh man, this was so simple. This was so straightforward. In other words, it's not something that's going to happen 1 out of 100 times. It's going to happen like 1 out of 20 or 1 out of 30 times, but you're getting that massive payout just because people are so predictable and they're clicking the things that they want to happen and that they think is the most likely thing. And they're not telling stories that are a little bit less likely to happen, but there's like a very clear path to them happening. And as you said, that's where I think like just all the money is in this pick 6 game. And it's also where all the fun is, because man, when you see that payout just going up and up and up, that's a pretty fun time.
Yeah. And often like just a way to play with our tool and see what it says for what's likely to happen and what's not.
Absolutely. So in fact, let me
what might correlate more than you think.
Yeah.
And like I don't like swear, but I don't use this thing as like religion or anything, but I just think it's you know, it's a way to like see like how the simulations end up cracking out, you know?
Absolutely. In fact, I wanted to bring up so some of these that we were already talking about. So like if you go with let's see here. I'm gonna go to receiving yards here. I'll actually bring up the tool real quick. So if we go here and I say, all right, I actually want a less on Justin Jefferson, but a more on Jordan Addison, we can see that actually this correlation doesn't look as good because we're so down on Addison in relation that actually, you know what? I think that game might be simming right now because that obviously doesn't make any sense. There can't be a negative 9% correlation bonus for just Jefferson. So we'll have to wait like 5 minutes for that game to actually finish simming once again, and then we'll be able to look at it. I think it's probably simming for some of the Puka stuff. One of our guys was just in the back end changing stuff around, but yeah, it's the tool is so good at that exact thing. It's finding those hidden correlations and finding where they are strongest. And sometimes they are a little bit counterintuitive, but that's where you can almost lean into it even more because that's when you're gaining the biggest advantage over what other people are trying to do.
Yeah. You just never really know with this thing and like what it wants, and just sometimes like just play with it and see what it thinks.
Mm-hmm.
And don't just do pure passing yards, receiving yards, because especially with Stafford, like, yeah, I understand Cup is back, but he might just spread around. Like it could easily break where it's Stafford and Cup have different more or less on the yards. And
I was
if
thinking about
everyone's
that kind of thing.
So what?
TwoGun, I was thinking about that exact type of thing. So if you remember, like one of the really big wins that you had recently was in that Jacksonville game on Sunday morning. And if I recall correctly, you had Lawrence under with Kirk and Engram unders, but then you left out Brian Thomas Jr., who went over, right? And so part of the reason why you did really well was because whenever anyone else was going to Lawrence, they were clicking Brian Thomas Jr., right? And so we could do something similar on this slate where maybe you are going, either more on Stafford, but then you take a less than on Cup and you hope he gets there with Puka and Tutu Atwell, things of that nature. Or maybe you're taking a less on Stafford, but you go with a more on either Puka or Tutu Atwell or Cooper Cup, and you just hope that all the others fail. So another instance where like that can work, I could very easily see something working out where you go less on Sam Darnold and Justin Jefferson, but a more on Jordan Addison. So yeah, lots of really creative ways to attack this one. This strikes me as one of the most fun pick six island games that we've had in quite some time.
Right. Like the way I did it essentially was the quarterback with some unders on receivers, but I didn't do the top receiver. And then I did the running back over. So yes, the team got out ahead, and having the top receiver got over, so that killed everyone that did that correlation, but it still correlated with the other stuff. So, but it's not like I took Brian Thomas more. I just left him out of it. I think when you do this, you just leave the guy out. Like you don't need to take the under and hope to hit on that too because you're like 100x or bust. Like you can still win, and instead of it being an 80x, it ends up being like a 25x.
Yeah.
If that guy goes over, if that guy goes with it. That's generally how I lean towards it. It's not just like pure hater. It's like, I wouldn't mind if he busted. The rest of it works.
Yeah, that's a good point.
I did have like Brian Thomas as part of the Moors. I generally had him. Our thing loved Brian Thomas in that game, so I generally wanted to have more on him. And I did have him in some less stacks with I forgot his name.
Well, it's
Trevor Lawrence. Yeah, like I wanted to, when you have a diversity of receivers like Trevor Lawrence does, you don't always have to go with the top one. But with these receivers, everyone thinks, it's like always Justin Jefferson is going to go with the same way as Sam Darnold, but it's just they don't. Yeah. They just don't.
You don't have to, and I think The one thing I'd say there is I think certainly people are going to be watching this and saying, okay, well, when do I take the opposite of the guy? And I think the answer is, what are you prioritizing? So for example, I think one instance tonight where I absolutely want the leverage pick is Aaron Jones less on rushing yards. Because if I make that the centerpiece, I know what I want to correlate with that, right? I want the Kyron Williams over on his rushing. I want the higher on Sam Darnold passing attempts, things like that, where you're telling a story that starts with that. If you are going with, a Darnold overstack, but leaving out Jefferson, you're not building something around the concept of Justin Jefferson does not hit. And so when to leave it out versus use that leverage pick is, I think, does the story revolve around that guy failing? And if it doesn't, you can just leave him out. If it does, then you take the leverage pick.
Right. I don't know. I just sometimes like take the wide receiver 1 and the wide receiver 2 in opposite directions and just leave the quarterback out of it. But it's not, again, it's not really a great correlation. It's just saying like that team does okay, not great in the passing game. Because not all, you just have to remember, when you have a main slate of 7 to 10 games, there's no reason to get really screwy around with the correlations, because if you nail one game screwy, some other game might be normal, and then everyone wins off that game. But when you're limited to one game and it gets a little screwy, that's when, if you have picks that are correlated but are not just so obvious correlation, that's when you hit. It's just something you have to remind yourself, is that everyone is stuck playing this game. They don't have the ability to win on other games where it's normal, like in the main slate, which is why I'm generally liking pick six more and more for just one games. Even 2 games can make it. If one game goes clean, then people win in the second game. You know what I'm saying? But when you're stuck with the one game, that's when the opportunity arises. And I know I'm kind of repeating what I'm saying over and over again, but I don't think you don't have to force stuff that's anti-correlated. It's okay to have stuff that is just not correlated with some stuff that is correlated. Yep. Because, you got the real dum-dums that just like throw everything and it's 1 in 64 for them to win. And then you got the kind of basic big sharks that are just, everything's gonna be correlated. And the truth will lie in the middle with these one games. Except for when everything is correlated and goes smoothly and the payouts are 10x and everyone hates themselves.
Yeah. All right. Let's jump into some showdown stuff. Before we do, though, I want to remind everybody, this is the last day where this promo code is available. Code FTN Hoops gets you 20% off any FTN subscription. We have already begun the NBA season. It's been a blast. We're talking Pick Six, Prize Picks, Underdog, all of those games every single day at noon Eastern, a show Daily Dime with myself and/or Zach Graham at Kawaisenberg DFS on Twitter. So we're having a lot of fun already. Make sure you get in. PGA is also going on there in Japan right now, so they're starting right before the NFL game. So I have 3 different sports to watch tonight. But Showdown tonight, I think, is also going to be really fun, because it sounds like you and I once again agree that the path is to go heavy on the Rams. And if you saw Caleb's article today, we have this awesome optimal data on roster construction and individual captains. And for one of the absolute first times, the highest rate of optimal is a 5-1 stack, and it's in favor of the Rams. Now, I believe that data was before Puka was ruled in, so I do have to get some updated data from him. But, man, it's like every single roster type is going to be close to the same optimal percentage. 16% was the worst, 21.7% is the best, which basically just means whatever is used the least often, that's what you want. And it just so happens that the 5-1 Ram stack probably going to be used the least often, and it's also the one that is showing up as the optimal the most often. So very much in on the Rams onslaughts. And backing that up is this theory that playing against Dan Campbell's Lions makes you worse the next week. We have seen Chris Long, I believe, the ex-Eagle, is the first one that I saw talk about this. He was talking about it in like week 1 and week 2 of this season. It has been true in each and every one of their games. Went back and looked last week. Informally, this narrative checks out as something that statistically is real. I might do an even larger deep dive of it to test just how real this hypothesis is. If we see the Rams go on and win again tonight, but like an easy example recently was Seattle losing out of the blue to the New York Giants. At the time, we thought, okay, well, maybe the Giants are actually just better than we expected. Well, they lost to Dallas. And at the time, that seemed like, oh, they were competitive against Dallas. Maybe they're better than we expected, except it looks like Dallas stinks. The Giants just got blown out by an Eagles team that was struggling a little bit. So, it seems like this theory is real. And if ever it was going to be real, like the whole concept of it is that Detroit just plays so much more physical than everybody else does. You're just kind of worn down and you're not ready to play your next game. Well, having to play 4 days later instead of 7 days later, I would think also makes that effect even larger.
Yeah. I don't know. I don't know about this whole Lions thing. I just know that the Rams are just. I mean, I know that this Vikings team just strikes me as having overperformed this entire year. They're going to be kind of tired. The Rams, yes, they're tired too, but they also play the Raiders. They didn't play the freaking Lions.
Yeah.
The Rams finally had their pieces back. Why are they really underdogs? It makes no sense. If you came from like the beginning of the year and you're like, wait, the Rams are underdogs at home against the Vikings? Cooper Kupp is playing? What? The hell is going on?
Yeah, there are a couple things at play here. I think one thing I've noticed is that Minnesota has honestly jumped out to a big lead in almost every single one of their games. Now, part of jumping out to a big lead is by being a good team, especially a good defense. They're creating so many turnovers early in games. So I don't want to say that like that doesn't matter, but last week was the first time we saw them actually have to play in a competitive game and even have to come from behind at times. They look significantly less capable offensively doing that. So if the Rams can actually flip the script and jump out to a big lead, suddenly I would be a lot more comfortable with the idea that they hold that lead than you might think for a team of Minnesota's caliber at this time. But another thing that stands out to me about this game is it's not like our sim data is factoring in the quote unquote Dan Campbell hangover effect. It's not like the sim data is factoring in the DVOA matchup for Jordan Addison. And yet, even as we bring this stuff into play, like the sim data is already telling us Jordan Addison is going to be an optimal captain 11% of the time, projected around 4.5%. We're already seeing Aaron Jones optimal less than 15% of the time, captain over 20% of the time. So essentially, like everything that the additional data that we have with the DVOA matchup stuff that has been so incredibly effective, this potential very real narrative of the Dan Campbell hangover, all of it is just telling us to go even further into the ideas that the Sims are already telling us are really strong ways to build tonight. So it also makes me excited for Showdown, which honestly, TwoGun, it feels like I'm way too excited for this game and it's just automatically going to go against me. But it seems to set up really nicely for us.
Yeah, I think you also have to see like who's like maybe going to be overused in Showdown, and I think in general the running backs, right? Like Aaron Jones just looks like he's always going to get 20 points. I don't know, is Kyron Williams maybe? I don't think he's going to be as overused as Aaron Jones will be. I'm just kind of like, who often gets overused in Showdown are these kickers. I'm not going to try to pronounce Will Richard. I feel like I've seen him get touted a lot, like because he keeps having these huge like kicking games. Like kickers are fucking random. I don't know what to say. Like,
yeah,
there's
I'll tell you, I do think Kyron Williams could end up being overowned pretty heavily because people might say, okay, I want to go to the Rams. I don't want to figure out what the hell's happening in that wide receiver room. I don't want to pick between Puka and Kupp and Atwell or anything like that. Maybe they would say, okay, I'll just go Stafford. but I think more likely they'll say, okay, I'll just go Kyren, and that fits the build anyway. So particularly in Rams heavy showdown lineups, I think Kyren will be overused as the captain.
Well, that's what our Sims data shows.
Mm-hmm.
Like isn't he like pretty much the only one that's like Ram that's overused as captain versus optimal?
Yep.
Cooper Kupp is 10, optimal 12.
Mm-hmm.
All these receivers are good. Matthew Stafford's good. Kyren Williams is the only one that's overused, like 18% projected versus 12% optimal.
Yep.
I'll be honest, I have 2 lineups right now. One's a 5-1 and one's a 5-1 Rams, one's a 3-3. I don't even think I have a running back in either of them. To me, I just think running backs are overused. Although it was encouraging to see how much Alexander Madison ate against the Rams, so you could say the same thing for about Aaron Jones, but maybe Alexander Madison is just the truth. My best ball teams hope that's the case.
Yeah, I'm with you. I think I definitely have a lean towards the passing games, and the DVOA data very much has a lean to the passing games as well. With the exception, like
the passing games, sorry to cut you off. You also tend to avoid the kicker.
Yeah,
who I think is going to be overused. I think Richard's going to be way overused. That's the one thing about our projections. I think they always under project how much people are going to use the kicker. I bet you Richard is like 30%.
Yeah. Yeah, especially this year. Like I think part of that is because our showdown projections are largely based on point projections and what an optimizer is going to spit out with those point projections. But based on how often kickers have hit so far this year in showdowns, people are just clicking them like crazy. And so it's hard to get the automated ownership to catch up to that effect. We have tried to do it. We've given them manual boosts and things of that nature, and we're still seemingly lagging behind some of the actual kicker ownership. So we'll continue to try and get that up to proper levels. But I agree with you.
The ownership credit, though, just to give y'all credit, like it's been amazing. Like what y'all do, like with the optimizer for 1 games, like generally y'all's ownership is like spot on for most of these guys. It's just you guys underestimate the kicker, so it's just like you kind of know where it's like always like it's just going to take away from other guys. But especially with this lineup, right? Because people with Nacua playing, people aren't going to want to use the Tutu Atwells and the DeMarcus Robinsons as much. They'll be like, I'll just use a kicker to like save some money, right?
Where the showdown ownership has been exceptionally strong is in the captain ownership too. By the way, I think comparing ours to everyone else's in the industries, our captain ownership consistently has been on the ball, and honestly, like that's probably the most important one to tell, right? Because that's like if you get the captain ownership right, you get the scripts that people are trying to build into their lineups, right? And that's what you can leverage most powerfully. So, I think again, like to me, that means a little bit anti-Kyren, but mostly anti-Aaron Jones. And we're talking about the running backs being overowned. This is a good matchup for Aaron Jones, but again, the LA heavy script is bad for Aaron Jones. So unless he pulls up Breece Hall and he just gets no production on the ground and crushes through the air, I think going against Aaron Jones tonight is probably solid in showdown.
I definitely fading Aaron Jones a lot in both showdown and pick 6, which feels weird because I feel like I'm always pro Aaron Jones.
Yeah.
Until everyone's pro Aaron Jones, and I'm anti Aaron Jones, and he generally goes crazy.
I like I like the fade of Aaron Jones on pick 6 a little bit more, honestly, because I can take the under 72.5 rushing yards and not fear the 40-yard screen pass touchdown, right? And so I like that aspect of pick 6 quite a bit as well. Just kind of another way that it complements just traditional DFS play really well. Deacon asks this very important question: who's now projected to be the 3rd receiver for the Rams, DeMarcus Robinson or Tutu Atwell? So, Deacon, a couple things here. First, a very important distinction to make when you're looking at the DVOA adjusted fantasy points against table. That wide receiver 3 spot is technically all other wide receivers. So it's not just who is the wide receiver 3, but it's how does the pool of wide receiver 3, 4, 5, 6, etc. Typically produce against that team versus other teams. When you're using the optimizer, that is that will show up. So like when you look at the DVOA matchup in the optimizer for Tutu, for Demarcus Robinson, for all those guys, they will show up as the same as this wide receiver 3 matchup. But to answer the question of like who I think is going to play more, that's a little bit harder. I would honestly assume that the snap share is a little bit higher for Demarcus Robinson, but he tends to be the guy who runs wind sprints more, whereas Tutu actually earns more targets and creates some explosive plays. So I think I am still in the play Tutu Atwell camp, but it's a lot harder to commit to that decision now that Puka's in, whereas before, where Demarcus Robinson we knew was going to be the 2 and Tutu Atwell was going to be the 3, I was extremely high on Tutu. All right, TwoGun, any more picks that tell you what, are there any picks that, ignoring correlation, ignoring leverage, you just feel like has a really high probability of hitting that maybe you're throwing into some picks or some pick 6 lineups to just kind of help make it a 6 pick or something like that?
Brainwash me into this Jordan Addison more. Let's see if there's any. No, I mean honestly, I really don't. Besides Aaron Jones rushing under, and again, that's kind of what I'm leading with more than anything. I just don't.
Yeah.
I just don't think it's gonna be that easy for them to just keep running on these Rams. So,
I think
so I don't have like a Josh Palmer type pick that we had like last Monday. You know what I mean? Like, I don't have one of those.
Yeah, I agree. That's a really good one. That was like a super high probability play. I will say I'm close to feeling that way about Jordan Addison. I definitely felt that way about Addison at 41.5. He's actually fallen to 44.5 now. So as we've talked about before, we're pretty damn sure that these numbers are coming from DraftKings Sportsbook, and they're not necessarily an indication of what's happening on pick 6. I think whenever we see lines go up, we know people are clicking that on pick 6, but people are clicking overs on pick 6 so much that when a number drops, I don't think that necessarily means that people are taking unders on pick 6. That's pretty much the rule that I've been following. Cooper Kupp also, by the way, just fell to 66.5. So at the very least, I think it tells us that people aren't like clicking the over like crazy on something. So that Addison 44.5 number probably still really, really solid over on pick 6 and certainly anywhere else as well.
Yeah. I just don't have one. Like, honestly, I just don't have a, to me, this is and it's okay. Because I felt the same way about this slate as I felt about the Jags one, right?
Yeah.
I didn't really have a strong play in the Jags Patriots, and that was the slate I've done the best on because I hit that 100x. I didn't. Yeah. I just kind of went with. I looked at with the pick, our pick 6 tool set. I love Brian Thomas, so I'm like, okay, I'll try to avoid doing less on him, and otherwise, I just kind of did my correlation thing, and one of them hit real well.
Yep.
Sometimes not having an opinion is the best opinion.
Yeah, I think another strong one for pick 6. I feel like you and I could talk about different scripts to use on pick 6 for hours and hours. We got to jump off here sooner than later, but if we do want to cover, like, not necessarily cover all our bases, but not go all in on this idea that the Rams are going to win this game or at least be super competitive, there's obviously a path where Minnesota does jump out to a lead, controls the game, just as they've done almost every single game this year. Aaron Jones more on rushing yards. I would 100% make my second pick Blake Corum less than 13.5 rushing yards. They won last week, but we saw even out of the bye, they still trust and want to ride the Kyren Williams train as much as possible. Corum only had 3 carries last game. If they're trailing from the get-go in this one, I wouldn't expect many more than that. And this Vikings run defense has been quite good, especially once they get a lead. So I think if you do want to start with Aaron Jones over on rushing yards, you get some really easy ones to follow that. Blake Corum less on rushing yards, and then probably, a less on Sam Darnold passing attempts or a more on Stafford passing attempts, something like that.
Yeah, I think you could go both ways. Like, you could go Matt Stafford lower on passing attempts and then go over with Kyren Williams and Blake Corum, basically saying that the Rams dominate this game.
Yep.
It sounds kind of silly, but it would work. And you
I
could do the
definitely
same
agree.
thing with
I
high
also think,
I think these running backs are going to generally be, like on the same team correlated together more so than apart, right?
yeah.
So it's just something to think about. You
Yeah,
can
I
go,
also think another interesting one would actually be Stafford. Sorry, Stafford to throw an interception because the Vikings have picked off pretty much everybody, and if they're throwing a lot, he's going to throw.
yeah, yeah,
All
that's
right.
a fair point.
Anything else we haven't touched on yet that you want to touch on here, TwoGun?
I think so.
Cool. In that case, let's wrap it up. I got some NBA stuff to go do, so it doesn't hurt to stop the show a little bit ahead of time. This is the most fun part of the DFS year, in my opinion. We get the start of NBA. We still have some PGA. NFL is going full blast. So we're happy to have all you guys with us. Thanks for tuning in. You can catch us tomorrow at noon talking NBA. We will see you then.